Ugh, this phone drives me crazy.
Excuse me, I'm the Sprint intern from Sprint. Try my new iPhone XR with an amazing liquid retina display.
This is amazing. Mind if I snap a few photos? Look at that color. I love this display.
I'm gonna need that back.
Switch to Sprint and get iPhone XR 64 gigabytes for $0 per month with an eligible trade-in and a Sprint Flex lease. Visit a Sprint store, sprint.com/iPhone, or call 1-800-SPRINT1.
Phone $0 per month for 18 months after $31.25 per month. Credit applied within 2 bills. If cancel early, remaining balance due. Excludes tax. Subject to credit. $30 activation fee. Coverage and offer not everywhere. Restrictions apply.
Ruin at the banks. Open your eyes to banks that are robbing you. You know who my favorite president was? Who? Thomas Jefferson. Because he saw all of this coming and tried to stop it. He fought the banks. JFK too, and they killed him for it. The banking institution is more dangerous than an army, he said. He also said that every generation needs a revolution, Jimmy. The American dream is just that. Just a dream. War is a continuation of politics, only by other means. Politics is a continuation of economics by other means. This is our bank. This is our war. And this is our plan of attack.
Banks have become an essential threat to our democracy. So consider this justice.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Folks, we have a problem with the studio. You can't hear the brakes run. I'm trying to get Janet now. Oh, great. For some reason, Janet ain't answering. She's online, though. Are you there, Janet? Well, we might get a show going here in a minute. Remind everybody we are totally listener supported. I'm not sure what's going on, but... Let me hang up the whole thing. Okay, let's see if we can get this working now. For some reason, Skype ain't letting me get Janet on. I don't know what the hell's going on here. Well, let me restart my damn Skype. I don't know what else to do. All right, I restarted my Skype. Maybe this will work. It's not letting me pull Janet in. Let me try calling her cell phone. Apparently you're on now, right?
There it is. I don't know why I did not hear any ringing.
Are you signed on the computer and your phone at the same time again?
I just signed on to the phone to try to get to you that way, so I'll just sign off right now.
Well, it's showing you which your phone number here and in your Skype.
Okay, so I'm signing off of the phones. Now I'm on the computer, so I'm not at one place. Okay, nothing else should be on now.
Yes.
But
Hi there.
Hi, Peter. We finally got you on. I'm so sorry for the delay. We don't know what was going on. Normally it rings loud and clear. Got my speakers on, and for some reason I wasn't getting any kind of ring to go online. But we're live and on air, and this is what are we on? The Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and I'm Janet Kara Lessin with Dr. Sasha, Alex Lessin, and our producer is a mad painter, Thomas Becker, also known as Thomas Becker. And today we have Peter Robbins, and we're so delighted to have you back, Peter. It's been quite a while, I think over a year or so, but we like to have Peter on about once a year or so. And I put up on aquarianradio.com this very long bio that Peter has, and you're just an amazing person with all these history and talents and education, and you do presentations. So rather than me try to pick and choose from your long bio and your vitae, could you tell us what you want our listeners to know about Peter Robbins, who you are, and your work and walk in the world? And before you start, Sasha, do you want to say anything?
Well, yeah, Peter, hi. Yeah, listen, what I'm really interested in is some of the same things you're interested in. When you talk about the murder of Forrestal and others in my field, it was Harrington who talked too much to.
Okay, now I have to get Janet and the guest back now, because it wouldn't let me just pull it in. I think Hawk's trying to fix it because the brakes weren't showing. And now it ain't letting me bring anybody in again. Right. I got the guest. I'm still waiting on Janet and them to answer. Okay. There they go. Okay, now you're live again. Hawk's trying to get the brakes working is what it is.
Yes. Oh, cool. So it's basically what has come down is this view that the Nazis from paperclip have controlled the United States, but the Navy has this super Navy good guy white hats that are trying to free us from the runaway corporate civilization and expose, all the subversion and mass murder and lies that have been going on. So if you react to that, that would be cool.
Yeah. Say again, Janet?
Oh, I sound. There was a strange sound, and I thought you dropped off, but you're still there. Great.
Yeah.
Take it away, Peter.
Okay. Before we get to your what you just said, Sasha, basically I'm an investigative writer who has tended to specialize in the subject of UFOs and their many implications. And that trail has taken me around a lot of corners. What you address right here, you touched on so many profound subjects and ideas, many of which I don't know for a fact are true. I suspect they are. I believe that some are. I fear some are. But as far as my not my problem, but I'm basically a nuts and bolts investigator, and I'm very careful to parse what I know but I can't prove, what I am convinced is true. So, there's so much in the post, digital world now, the entire internet information viruses that go out that have just enough information to make us all take seriously certain profoundly upsetting conspiracies and nefarious plans and background static from the power brokers, who have always been moving the chess pieces the way that what we'll laughingly call history operates.
Okay, you know what, Peter? I understand what you're saying right on, but when a person has immersed themselves in this material as you have, I would like to hear your speculations. Sure, label them as speculation, but they're really worth something to me because you've got so much data.
Well, I am not sure how much data I have, as much as experience, impressions. In the past year or two, it's kind of re-hit me in so many ways that we have to be really careful with what we end up believing, as opposed to that there's a lot there to believe, but there are holes in the picture, and in our enthusiasm, we may ignore them and just go for the gusto. Let me give you a little background on me first, though. I am a New Yorker. I've lived most of my life in New York City. I don't right now. I live out in the countryside in central New York State. I travel a fair amount for my work, and over the past few months, speaking jobs and conferences have brought me back to Roswell, New Mexico, and Athens, Greece, for a Wilhelm Reich scientific conference that actually focused to a degree on his UFO-related work, which is almost unheard of in the world of Reich-related conferences. And just 2 weeks ago in beautiful Exeter, New Hampshire, the site of an important historic UFO event. When I give you an example of how things have grown in my mind relative to a conspiratorial subdivision. Many years ago, when I first began to really immerse myself in the world of UFO studies, and I heard the term secret underground installation or secret underground base, I must have rolled my eyes because it just sounded so Flash Gordon to me. You know what I mean? Yes. But over the years of continuing the work, among other things, I've learned that for, half a century, 70 years, etc., secured, secret, underground installations in the military, in the intelligence community, in the corporate world, in medical testing, in storage, that even the best educated of us lay people, in terms of available literature and focused authorities and research specialists, I don't think we have any idea what's going on under the surface of the earth. Is some of it them, that nefarious group of non-human beings that we can chatter about for the rest of our lives and never figure it out? Or more likely, the groups of thems that in some cases have probably always been with us here on Earth, one dimension away, living who knows where, or although it almost seems passé now, and some brush it off, I'm old school, so I will include extraterrestrial visitors, as well as almost anything else that our imaginations can generate. And maybe it's a good way to begin this show to say that some years ago I came upon the wonderful definition of a Zen beginner, which is knowing that you know nothing and having it be all right. Now, after 40 years in UFO studies, I know considerably more than nothing about the subject. But more and more I'm struck by how little I actually can, cite tooth and verse. I have colleagues who will tell you any number of variations on who all are visiting us and from where and for how long and why. Absolutely as set knowledge. There's no way I can ever verify that, and no way they can ever prove that. So in this world of UFO and paranormal studies, the best of us, the most enthusiastic, also has to move forward if we're trying to establish this for other people in a way that is skeptical in the best sense of the word, and that your investigations are quality. We do shows like this, you guys as hosts and me as a guest. We're ready for this stuff. A lot of the people we know are ready to go on this. Disclosure now. Every possible, let's just get to every alternative energy source. And if the petrochemical industry collapses, and the stock market as well, we'll be working on solar power and wind. It's all those other people in the world that I think about more than the folks I meet at conferences in regard to what I'm saying right now, who are not ready for this, who are perfectly decent people or indecent people. They're everybody we know who are going about their lives, paying their bills, raising their kids, hoping that they have health coverage when they're old, trying to follow a dream maybe, but they're oblivious to this. To a great degree, it's because everybody since the immediate post-war years has been brought up in a culture where even the simple terms, UFO, alien, is cultural, psychological, total shorthand for, hi, I'm delusional, or I want to fool you, or I want to feel special, or that's one of my favorites, or I'm a shyster of some sort, and or I'm just flat out mentally ill, or I'm just a total goofball New Age believer, or how do we help those people to where we think we are at least? Or in my case, one of the things I think I do best, and it kind of lends itself to my very earthbound style and research methods, is get a lot of regular good folks who think what I do is either laughable, maybe a little pathetic, or just quirky as hell, get them through that first door, get them into the foyer, the hallway, so that they can experience for themselves, maybe the subject isn't so crazy, and that presentation actually made good points, and the guy didn't seem to be foaming at the mouth, and he referenced some books and documentaries, maybe we should watch them. We're not going to change unless the unforeseen happens, which is some kind of wholesale disclosure, willing or unwilling, or that they, the ones who directly involved, have reached a point where they say, enough already, we're here, we're going to let everybody know tomorrow, everybody get used to it, you're going to have a rough couple of weeks. I'm going on here, but I just sort of wanted to, give your audience an idea of where I'm rooted in my work and my basic point of view, which is evolving and shifting all the time. When you deal with the paranormal professionally, you always have to be prepared for thinking out of the box or realizing a view that you had maintained does not hold water compared to new research that's just been presented. I know you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I find really useful, no matter what the symbolic or linguistic or mathematical systems that people use to describe phenomenon, at some level, some are more efficient and some are less efficient in generating hypotheses like, is there water on Mars or not? It says so here. This guy says the planet told him. This guy says it was in the records, blah, blah, blah. Which one most efficient? And you can go like that and you can say, what is supports the hypothesis and what supports the null hypothesis. And all we're ever saying, because we're just parsing data from our limited frequencies that we access, all we can say is that right now, this hypothesis is the best we can do, but the menu ain't the meal.
That's the truth. There's no question about it. I'm thinking right now that we just lost our Cassini spacecraft, which has been working away around Saturn for 20 years. What a beloved piece of machinery. And how much, when we use the euphemistic we have learned. You know, I don't know anything about Saturn new, but people who should know do. And the full arc of the satisfaction of thinking about not just has science progressed in a peaceful way and taken us out in a more positive direction, but a wonderful team of people who worked together for 20 years on this, some of whom began and ended it together, had the satisfaction of contributing and doing something almost unheard of, sadly, as we continue to progress in this crazy world of ours.
So they know that if it's so or not, that whether the moons of Saturn have intelligent occupants or not, they know, even though we don't know. Is it?
I believe you're right. I take that hypothesis seriously, and if there were one question I could have answered of the myriad relative to who are they, why are they here, where are they from, what about the dark side of the moon, blah, 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 every possible thing, I would like to know some more. Are Saturn's moons inhabited? Is it kind of like the 2001 hypothesis of space is yours, but keep away from a few locations?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Well, I was listening that you were concerned about the people that may get left behind. I don't really worry about them because I just, I'm kind of like at the front of the path there, and I'm got my machete, and I'm just clearing the way. And as I clear the way, there's other people come beside me, and they start making the path bigger and wider. And we're just creating such a big, bright light at the head of this path that people are like Tom Sawyer. They're saying, what are they doing? Oh, my goodness, let's go over there.
I'll give you my apple if I can paint your fence.
Yeah. So every day I get people that write to me or call me, and they say, I've seen your show with so-and-so, and I just woke up all on my own, because I had one fellow say that he was standing in a Walmart checkout, and his eyes caught the eyes of another human, and it was like it was a man to man. It wasn't love, but all of a sudden when they caught eyes, something happened, and they woke up and they started seeing the true history of the earth, and we don't know what the catalyst might be. That probably could have been, souls from a past life that, we're in the same soul family, but people are just finding their catalyst that is taking them from one reality one day. It's like the Berlin Wall. I grew up in the 60s, and the Berlin Wall seemed to be the only reality, and all these people were trying to escape and get killed. And then one day, Dan Rather was on top, and the bricks were coming down. And in 24 hours, we had a whole different reality. So that's what I see is happening on some level. The bricks are falling. The veil is pierced, and now it's ripping and disappearing.
Well, from the existential point of view, everything's really perfect, and we're receiving the challenges that we need in order to rise above the situation and integrate the apparent opposites and find a synthesis.
That too. So, Peter, what do you know? There's what you believe, and there's knowing. And there's all kinds of levels of looking at all this information, and you have been there blazing the trail for over 40 years.
Yeah. Some of the things that I will absolutely put myself on the record, and what I'll laughingly call my career. We're not alone in the universe. There are probably a myriad of other intelligences that come and go many or some at least, in very high technology conveyances. How many, even to say years, centuries, millennia ahead of us, some of them are. We can only make educated guesses or uneducated ones. I'm convinced that so many of the power brokers, the people, again, who are not elected, but the ones who control the way things are to a great degree, are conflicted. You lie about something for a certain amount of time, and it becomes so deeply ingrained in who you are, or what you feel you represent, or what you believe. If your views evolve, if you're in a microcosm that still supports that view, then you may find yourself fairly alone. In 1947, when the whole UFO phenomena, so-called modern age of UFO sightings, broke in the world, I'm sure there were people around Harry Truman and very possibly the president himself who felt after 3 months, 6 months, a year of study, the office of the President of the United States would make a major statement, and the world as we knew it would change. That, of course, never happened. I can give you my thoughts on why, but it doesn't matter. Our government is maybe more dedicated than any other one to continuing to not share what it knows, to continue to not let go of the locks, the keys to the locks on the secrets that form this whole core of our national security state. And make no mistake about it, it started with the subject of UFOs and, to a degree, nuclear weaponry. That is the core of the world that we live in. We're up against, a huge monster in that sense as far as the truth goes. But one thing I observe on a regular basis, especially traveling and speaking, and I couldn't say this 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago to a degree, but every year more and more people that speak to me about this care less and less what other people think about what they think about how seriously they take the subjects of UFOs and their implications. That's a good thing, but it's still a change that's moving arithmetically. It's not like, the Vietnam anti-war movement at its height. And we're actually coming up later this month to what I am going to guess is going to be a first-rate PBS series on the Vietnam War, something that we can all learn from. And Ken Burns is probably our most distinguished filmmaker at this point. I'm off on a tangent, but unless there were some huge international modus operandi or some secret broke, and many have, they're just not taken seriously. They're not on the cover of the world's largest magazines or the subject of, lead news broadcasts around the world. They're the subject of talks at UFO conferences, or an article that's published in a journal that 400 people read, or somebody's online blog, or. Many years ago, when I started to do this work, my dad, who takes all this quite seriously, but at the time certainly was a very understandable and clear-thinking skeptic, really helped me sharpen my thinking, my arguments, my ability to discuss this in a sensible and effective way. And one of his questions was, how could you keep a secret like this so big? There'd be plenty of leaks. And the fact is, there have been more genuine leaks in the last 70 years than probably anybody in my field is aware of. But where do they go? And I just cited some examples. Some other things that I believe I know is that we have probably had a program that is sort of a shadow program to the NASA programs that a lot of us grew up with, that we simply never learned about, that were thought to be none of our business. NASA is a civilian agency, but it's naive to think that there haven't been classified missions. Now, this is sort of a stepping stone into lots of absolutely extraordinary claims by people of highly specific accounts of, the secret space program and the like. And in all such things. So what do you think of the recent claims? Like we have William Tompkins, who came out with Selected by Extraterrestrials. He just came out. He spoke at the MUFON conference in Vegas in July. I happened to make my way there. It was brilliant. He was brilliant. Corey Good, Michael Sala, Anna Bishago, all these people were there seriously talking about the different sides, the nuts and bolts sides, and the program, the breakaway civilizations, and now he's dead. And hopefully they'll continue the work. There were several authors that were going to take his work and get that published. Yeah. But it seems the last 2 years we have a huge upsurge of whistleblowers that are coming forth, and we have interviewed at least a half a dozen to a dozen secret space program super soldiers, and some that were just taken and used in the military. And we listened to them, and they seemed very sincere and earnest. And you did start out with Bud Hopkins as working with experiencers, so we're still working with the experiencers. What do you think about the whole secret space program and these people like Randy Kramer and all these others that are saying, I've been taken to Mars and it wasn't necessarily something I signed up for? Yeah.
Basically, there's kidnapping and murder, and it goes on. And, what's your take on that? Is that real?
What do you think?
I don't know. I'm studying it case by case. I'm using the best tools that I have, which are my critical thinking, my common sense, and a certain amount of accrued experience. Also, the understanding that people, well-meaning people, people who are dedicated, people who have really pledged their lives to trying to aid a bigger cause or open a new area, people are still prone to exaggerate, to confabulate, to make things up, to want to feel special, to inject themselves in the story. And that is with respect to everyone. I don't know. What I do know is I learned something really important about how I think one should go about looking into the claims of, say, a Corey Good or the gentleman you just cited.
Tompkins.
Yeah, exactly.
Tompkins.
Right.
Yeah.
When I was about 12 years old, I was already a big film fan, and I loved old movies. I still do. But I was quite charmed by the small series of films from the late 30s into the 40s, the Sherlock Holmes movies with Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce. And that got me reading Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories. I still have a great deal of admiration for that mythical character, but the way that Conan Doyle created Holmes and why he was such a good detective in great part was because of deductive reasoning, or when you are confronted with a mystery, a problem, an allegation, a murder, a claim, begin by investigating the most boring, logical, most likely possibility as fully as you can. And before moving on to the second most boring, logical possibility, really expend every effort that you can. And just keep going, taking one more step up to a less likely cause, possibility, or answer to your question. Now, I will tell you, as a professional investigative writer, that can be incredibly tedious, really boring. It's not romantic or sexy. However, if you are now at the point where you're starting to look at, well, maybe this person was sent into space for 20 years and came back and they did this thing. I mean, these are, let's face it, these are pretty intense claims that you at least know that nothing has explained it up until now. again, that's time consuming and it's not fun and it is boring. I stand by it, but I understand all too well why a lot of people in our short attention span theater, internet, and outernet, stare at your handheld device more and more world behave that way or are not really interested. They're more interested in the sensation, the wonderful possibilities, the what ifs. I'm thinking of a wonderful old early Bob Dylan lyric of something is happening, but you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? Even with all my experience as a researcher, I'm still, one of countless Mr. Joneses. I don't know what's going on, but I know what's going on around me. And again, some things I do know. But the secret space program, like I said, as a kid of a certain age who remembered, all of the how exciting the first space missions were, and also as a kid who could have cared less about sports, I memorized the names of, the original 7 Mercury astronauts and things about them. I really hero worshiped them. But then, of course, I wouldn't have thought that NASA or our government, was sending up missions or starting to or considering that we, the people, were not going to hear about. That's the military mindset informed by the intelligence community and often with good cause. And, we're stuck with that in this crazy, untrusting world that we live in. The other thing is all of us that are involved in this work, the 3 of us, so many people that we know, we're coming at it from different angles. We all have different backgrounds. We have areas of study or experience that are the really important ones to us, and the other ones are, incidental to one degree or another, or interesting, but not quite as much. That, like you say, Janet, we're all moving forward on this. Again, with respect, I think there's so many millions and millions of people who are sleepwalking and who don't even know or notice that we're moving forward, and again, may have a very rude awakening. This is such a challenge to historic thinking, religious thinking for so many people, especially old school. If anybody who is fundamentalist in their religious beliefs, the religion is almost immaterial. If there's an inflexibility around this, I've had debates, arguments, conversations with friends who happen to follow a fundamentalist Christian path, and the most strict of them absolutely what I would consider, with some respect, possibly a advanced craft from another part of the universe or cosmos or galaxy or whatever, manned or not by some kind of sentient, intelligent beings. They know, in quotes, that's not true, because their religious teachings tell them that it's all minions of Satan. It's all signs and portends as predicted in the book of Revelations. They know, in quotes, and there's no convincing them otherwise. It reminds me of one of my most esteemed colleagues, close in a moment, great mantras, which is, don't bother me with the facts, I've made up my mind.
Right, and we can't do anything with the people that have caught the God virus, and they have no room in their consciousness to even look. They've got their blinders on,
antibodies,
and they're not going to do it. But even the Pope, the Catholic Church is looking at how to baptize. Introduce Jesus to the extraterrestrials and start baptizing them and converting them to Jesus. So there's people
exactly
across the continuum doing this. So, but I'm interested in, you start out with Bud Hopkins. I remember reading Bud's book. I had experience, I've had contact all my life. I know so much stuff. Maybe I'm totally crazy. Maybe some human or extraterrestrial mind control person is sitting there with the Janet puppet and pumping thoughts into my brain all the time, and I'm so important that they're doing that. I don't, I just live my life, and I speak from my heart, my personal truth, and what affects me and what affects people around me, and what do I feel. I'm very intuitive, I'm very psychic, and a lot of things that I get on this psychic level come true, and they manifest and they're verifiable by many other people. But we can all be in one great big group psychosis, but then and again, what does that matter? If we're all in this shared psychosis, then at least have fun with it and go to conferences.
Amen to that, sister. But again, my years with Bud have made it abundantly clear to me that the kind of experiences that you've had are as real as the microphone I'm talking into, and have been shared by more people than probably anybody would be comfortable knowing the real number around, including my late sister Helen and so many people I consider dear friends, and many of them for decades. It's simply the way it is. It's the world that's crazy in that sense, not you or I or Sasha. It's what's the great quote? The world is not only more complex than we imagine, it's more complex than we can imagine. That's a variation.
Right.
It's okay.
I find that when I bemoan others, the ignorance of other people, even though you give them intellectual models that could free them, what I really realize is that the reason that bugs me is that there's parts of myself that are ignorant and that are resistant to a paradigm-breaking information. And so I think it's really critical to have empathy for people who are at this point ignorant.
Yeah, we can have compassion for those people. My point is, I'm still looking at, okay, so we get all these stories, and there are, hundreds of YouTubes. There's hundreds of interviews from these people. There are all these stories that are kind of converging. It's kind of like, if you think it that way, did Betty and Barney Hill start this whole phenomenon that the Greys took him, and they're the first to break the story, and then everybody started coming on board? No, then you go back in time and you go, no, I had a Grey experience, but mine was before 61 or 62, so that's not what that's about. How do we, as a community, the UFO extraterrestrial experiencer phenomena community, figure out what's real, what's true, what isn't, or does that even matter? Are we just creating this alternative reality, just like, people could call Jesus a big myth, and, Buddha the myth, and everything's a myth, and the Anunnaki are a myth, and at some point some people decide that, no, that's not a myth, that's the truth. Like you were talking about, these people that are really entrenched in their religions, that is the absolute truth, and there's nobody going to convince me out of my belief structure. And for the extraterrestrials, they might look at these people, or people from another belief system, and go, well, they're crazy for believing that stuff. You're going to die and get 20 virgins or 50 or whatever it is. So one person can look at another person's belief and their systems and say, well, that's absurd. Why do they believe that?
You ask a terrific question, and one can live in one's own world. Many people do, self-contained or with a small group of people, like-minded people, prioritizing your own peace of mind, creature comforts, doing no harm, all good stuff. And then there are those people who feel they either need to or should be contributing to the greater good on some level, thank goodness. If they're experiencers or abductees or had the kind of experiences you have, Janet, number one, that is totally profoundly life-changing. you may be on your own, in your own home, with Sasha, having a very positive existence, eating right, living a good life by your definition. But at the same time, you're public people. You are out there. People all over the world can tune in this show, can listen to your thoughts, can hear what your guests have to say. I think, strangely, one of the most important consciousness expanders, tools to help bring about better times and a better world are exactly what's happening with us right now. One or two people or three people have an idea that, it's all changed so quickly. The idea of having a radio show, a real radio show that is internationally available, one podcast may have regular listeners of 63 or 12. Another one can easily have, 1.4 million or 40 million. It is what you make it, and that's terribly exciting. So far, whatever else we want to gripe about in this world, in this country, we are still free to be on the air live right now, talking about the things that we are, without impunity. So what? Somebody's going to try to monitor some communications of ours? Please give me a break. We are a public stirrers of the pot. The best thing they can do is send us vitamins and hope we stay well. If you had a car crash while falling out the window, while getting cancer, while accidentally being shot, while falling down the stairs, your friends might think there was foul play. But at the same time, why bother? The secrets are out. It's just that many, many people are still not listening. And the people that are listening, many of them are listening to information that has been tweaked, tailored, doctored, manipulated. It's truthy. If you follow my drift, it's truth. It's almost, like an advertising product. It's almost as good as the truth, but it's not. It's been put in, palpable form for you, and we've added a little bit of flavor enhancer and food coloring, and we sanded off an edge here, and we're not going to mention this one little creepy detail about this, but gee, isn't this exciting and stuff's happening?
Well, ultimately, each person makes their own decision. Yeah. And you can't convince them otherwise unless you are, you can give them enough proof and evidence which will satisfy what they think is proof and evidence. It's just a vicious hamster trail ride.
There's some pretty universal things that add credence or likelihood, like multiple witnesses, cross-checking. There's a number of things that can raise the reliability of a report.
Yeah, but you have 2 or 3 billion people that all believe the same religion. Just because you have billions of witnesses to the same phenomenon doesn't necessarily mean that's not truth, but it could be a truth.
It's their social truth.
It's their social truth, yeah.
You have both raised a really wonderful question, and it kind of takes us full circle to something that probably contributed massively to us following the paths that we have, which is to live a positive, contributing, interesting, hopefully overall very happy and full life. Fighting in the trenches for unpopular or uncomfortable or exotic truths is one of the ways to do this. And if at the end of a day of doing a show like this, of going to a seminar, of speaking with friends, of making a nice meal, you don't go to bed saying, I'm living my principles, I'm doing pretty well, I'm working on myself, and I didn't do anything to totally screw things up today. That's not bad. There's a wonderful, it's alleged to be a Sicilian proverb that I absolutely love, and I think about regularly, and if it's not, it should be, which is living well is the best revenge. And in this crazy world, we can shake our fists at the universe. We can be livid with righteous indignation. We can absolutely be disgusted with the world we live in, angry at so many people. And who wins when we do that? Fight the good fight, but have fun, take care of yourself, be there for others, stick to your principles. But I'm reminded of the legendary fake documentary Spinal Tap, which really was such a pioneering piece of humor. Dear Rob Reiner, there comes a time at the end with this wonderful, goofy, heavy metal band where they're doing an interview with the drummer, and it's about the sixth drummer. They all die mysteriously. And I think he leads into it by saying, his basic belief is have a good time all the time. Now, that's practically somewhat difficult, but in its own goofy sort of, metalhead way, it's not any different than a good thought that one could aspire to from Buddhist teachings or a Zen tradition. Be of good cheer, be of good faith, fight like hell for what you believe in. When you have a good time, have as great a time as you can, and be one of the good guys. But commit yourself. I think that's a big part of it. You really have to make decisions on where you want to, spend your time, give your support to, and who you want to stand shoulder to shoulder with when it comes down to it.
Right. Yeah, the best revenge is a life well lived. And may that be what they put on my tombstone, although I'll probably just get cremated. I wonder where our music is. So I think we should be on a break right now because it's 58 on the top of the hour. So, Matt, are you there? Are we supposed to be going to break right now?
Oh, yeah, it ought to have kicked in. It hasn't yet.
Oh, it hasn't kicked in yet. Okay. Well, we will be coming up on a break any second now. I love what you just said, Peter. Yeah. That was awesome. I have clients. I do counseling with people, individuals and couples, and I have them, they whine, moan, groan, and complain. But at the end of the day, I don't say it to them, but I say to Sasha, like, well, I hope they enjoy that because that's what they're doing. People are doing what they do, and on some level, they must be enjoying it, or they would do something else.
The function of the inner critic is merely to improve your behavior, to take steps in the right direction, not to beat you up. That's neurosis.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, when we come back, I would like to talk more. I'd like to know what you want to talk about.
I want to know about Forrestal.
Oh, sure.
And we can put our wish list out there, but I do want to get our commercial break over with so we can start a subject without getting interrupted. And so, they just installed a new studio, or a new, system, and things aren't quite acting like they normally do. So let me just ask you, Peter, what are some of the things that you want to cover for the second half that you want our listeners to know about you and your work?
Yeah, I as an independent writer, researcher, public speaker, I'm always looking for new subjects to explore. And the past few months, I've given talks on 3 completely different ones in 3 very different locations. One on the USSR's most best-known UFO incident that I spoke about this summer at a conference in Greece, 1989 or so. It just was a fascinating case, and I had a personal connection to it. The other is a subject that has dogged me for decades that I kept returning to and then started to generate different papers and talks on, which is the origin of what I call the UFO ridicule factor. It makes no sense. It's completely counterintuitive that in our culture, when you say you've seen something in the sky you don't recognize, it's seen as a presenting sign, as I mentioned earlier, for, mental dysfunction or being a liar or being a true believer, anything but seeing something in the sky that you didn't recognize. The other thing is completely other direction. For years, if I was reading a magazine or a newspaper and I came upon a print advertisement that had a UFO theme or an alien, whether it was funny or trying to be serious, to try to help you, help them sell their product, I'd clip it. And some years back, I got out the
thought, Peter.
Yep.
Hold that thought. There's finally our music. We'll be back and we'll explore your third subject. You're listening to Safety. Not call. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
The Secret Society Revealed, with your host, Joseph Atwell, author of Caesar's Messiah, The Roman Conspiracy to Invent Jesus, and Shakespeare's Secret Messiah. The groundbreaking discoveries that gives us a new understanding of how governments and elites use mind control to manipulate their subjects. Join Mr. Atwell as he lifts the veils of deceptions of our modern world. Mondays, 12 noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time on Revolution Radio.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
Hi, this is Bo.
And this is Rocco.
And the Bo and Rocco Show is here to offer insight into legal and lawful remedies. Our goal is to remain free and help others remain free in an ever-increasing police-like state. With the help of our guests, we try to answer questions such as what went wrong and what can we do about it.
So tune into Revolution Radio at www.freedomslips.com Wednesday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to listen to the Bo and Rocco Show.
You don't need to expect us.
We're already here.
Revolution Radio.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I'm your host, Janet Care Lessin, with Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin and our producer, Thomas Becker, also known as the Mad Painter, and our guest, Peter Robbins. And before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to the donation button on freedomslips.com and make your donation. $1, $10, $15, $20, $100, $1,000, $1 million, whatever you can donate is greatly appreciated. And we do thank you very much for your donation. Mad Painter, how are we doing with the donations this month?
We've raised $1,470. We need $2,575, and for the extra equipment, we still need $390.
All right.
We need quite a bit. Please donate.
Please donate.
Yeah, Hawk has established this radio station where you get to hear things you just could not hear. This is the most successful of these alternate stations, and this is really a great enterprise, and you're part of it, so help us.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody. All right, so at the break, you were listening to the third thing. Peter, you look at magazine articles and clip them, and then we got cut off.
Yeah, it just became kind of an unconscious habit over the years. And some years ago, I contacted colleagues and asked them if by chance they did the same thing, and many of them did. I had them copy the articles that they had, extended it to colleagues in other countries, and ultimately took a long, hard look at all of these ads. My question was, some folks feel that such advertising is part of a general plan to condition the public to the presence of these things, and that, it's part of an actual ongoing plan. The other thought is that images of UFOs and aliens, whether they're funny and cartoon-like or very accomplished, generally cause people to stop and to look at them. They can feel that the whole subject is completely bogus and laughable, but in that case, they might stop to have a little fun at the expense of the ad or the subject, or they may be at the other extreme and true believers or know about the reality from firsthand experience, in which case it's like, here's another mark of how deeply it's creeping into our culture. However, it may be because it's a mercantile fact. That they get more hits or more potential sales using that kind of subject matter, or something in the middle. I can't say for sure, but it was a great opportunity to research the subject, to look at these wonderful images, to present them to audiences with the copy that's generated, some of it ludicrously silly, some of it strangely knowing. Quite a number of UFO-related ads over the decades have broken down into alluding to back engineering and high technology, cattle mutilations and the connection to the UFO phenomena, and a surprising number very specifically geared around abduction. And quite a number of those ads, insurance companies having a little fun with the subject, and almost always it's cars and cows that are being abducted in their ads.
Right.
Again, for me, it's always to get this was a fun talk, but it also had a serious edge. Where the one on the beginning of the ridicule factor, I think, is crucially important, because if we regular folks, don't have an appreciation whether or not we take it deadly seriously, or again, dismiss it as flying saucers and little green men, to understand how it began. makes it possible to really point out to people that they've been had with respect, along with their parents and in many cases their grandparents. There is a history of the way this was done, and it's fascinating, chilling, and at the same time, it was incredibly effective. The fix was in, not just by the end of the summer of 1947, but literally by the end of July. The major media, led by a ferociously dedicated New York Times, literally convinced the American people that there was nothing to this phenomenon, that it was all explainable in some kind of conventional terms, or as possible advanced weaponry was alluded to, testing of missiles, the Soviets testing in our airspace, war jitters because people were still coming down from World War II, or war jitters, feeling their phrase for something approaching PTSD, that it looked like we were going to go toe-to-toe with the Soviets at that point. That was the summer that the Cold War came down in earnest and absolutely became the important subject it was for the next 45 years. But Sasha, you wanted to talk a little bit about James Forrestal. There's a name that many Americans don't know, and not only should they know, but that it's just another great confirmation of those who do not understand history are condemned to repeat it. And I'm embarrassed to say I'm forgetting the name of who I'm quoting at the moment. James Forrestal was not just America's first Secretary of Defense. He was really quite a larger-than-life, self-made man who came from a small town in upstate New York and ended up like almost the living embodiment of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. And I don't mean to over-romanticize here. He went from being, a poor Irish Catholic American to being one of the most influential, charismatic, powerful, and trusted and respected men in American history. If we were alive between 1940 and 1949, the three of us right now, instead of here in 2017, we would be seeing the name of James Forrestal in newspapers literally as often as we would Harry Truman or, to a degree, Franklin Roosevelt. He went from being a idealist who wanted to join the RAF at the end of World War I, left Princeton 2 weeks before graduation to do that, trained in Canada, but the war was then over. And he began his career on Wall Street, and he was very good at it. So much so that by the height of the Depression, where most of America was in very tough times, he was the living equivalent of a millionaire, living in a home that he had built on the Upper East, I forget the name of the street, it's a very famous street in New York, but he had a private house built right on that spot on the East River, not far from the 59th Street Bridge. He went to, ultimately he went to Washington as one of Roosevelt's $1-a-year men. These were dedicated businessmen who were patriots, who volunteered their time to be at the call of the President of the United States to help with the financial crisis and help bring it under control. And again, they did that for $1 a year. Forrestal took it particularly seriously, and while he could have stayed in New York and continued to make considerable money, he moved to Washington and never left. He went on to become Assistant Secretary of Navy, then Secretary of Navy, and distinguished himself not just in being a crucially important and invaluable team player. in the Pentagon, but as somebody who actually put himself in harm's way on a number of occasions. Imagine a normal cabinet officer. There's a war on, and you go into the war zones, and you're being fired at rather than staying in the Pentagon. Made a lot of people unhappy, but he was at the Battle of Leyte Gulf and the Solomon Islands and a number of other ones. At the end of the war, it was Forrestal, not a team of people, but James Forrestal, one person, that President Truman charged with dismantling the War Department and creating what is now our modern Department of Defense. And he did it. He did it. It took a toll on him, tremendous infighting between the service branches, and as of September of 1947, only 6 weeks, maybe a little bit more after Roswell, the United States Air Force came into existence, and it was jimmying for position. He ran that agency, and he ran it well until he stepped down from that position in March of 1949. However, he became Secretary of Defense 6 weeks after the whole UFO thing exploded. My research bears out that because he was the kind of character he was, he had his own personality quirks, he tended to personalize all of his failures and successes, whether or not they were private or professional. And I think it weighed on him increasingly that even as the head of the most powerful military organization in the history of the world that we know of to that point, he and his Pentagon were able to do nothing to change the course of the UFO situation, to get to the bottom of it, so to say. And I know I'm not a mental health professional, of course, but I know enough to know that if the conditions are coming into effect that can cause you to have what we'd call a nervous breakdown, they certainly don't all manifest at one time, and many people are very good at keeping a straight face to the world as their inner lives become chaos. Literally,
I'd like to add something, a piece that you don't know about this. If you read Selected by Extraterrestrials by Bill Tompkins, he worked with Forrestal. Mm-hmm. And I was at the MUFON conference, and he's telling me that he was working with him at the time up to his death. And basically it was what he was dealing with was the information they had from behind Nazi lines.
He was the spy master.
About the technologies that the Nazis had, which were, hundreds of years in advance of the U.S. in any way, shape, or form. And so apparently, I can't prove this, but this is what this story was about, was that the United States basically surrendered on some level and just gave way for the paperclip people to come over here and take over the United States. And they did. They came over. Ron Braun and all those people came over, took over, and they were just integrated into all the different secret programs think tanks that were going on at the time. You really Peter, got to read this book and at least look at it, because it's just amazing.
Sure.
So Bill's looking at me. He's just like looking at me in the eyes. He said, "I got to tell you this. I got to get this out." And this man died within a month of this conversation. Bill Tompkins was dead. It's almost like he knew something, and I have to get this information out to you. And when he was looking at me, he said, "There's something about you." Now, see, I'm a telepath. I have had telepathic communication with extraterrestrials since the crib. And that's what he says in his book. He says, "I have nonstop telepathic communication with extraterrestrials." Now, he didn't know who I was. He goes, "There's something, it's about your chakras. The telepathic communication is in your third eye and crown chakra. That's where you get the buzz when you're receiving this communication."
He had a real secretary that would transmit to him, would talk to him all the time too.
Right. So he would receive all this communication. He'd be in a meeting, and someone would telepathically tell him something. This secretary about where he needs to go, what correction, and they would just go from totally frustrated and couldn't figure it out to solving the problem and making these huge, massive changes that allowed them to have the secret space program. Anyway, so Forrestal, I don't think he went crazy. I think he was killed. And I think
he was murdered, but he did have what we would call a profound nervous breakdown that predated the murder. The breakdown occurred, I can almost give you the exact date. I think it fully manifested itself. Maybe it was like March 18th or something, whatever the date that he stepped down and the second Secretary of Defense took over. Within days, he was institutionalized in Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland. Appropriate, certainly, in that he was a former Secretary of Navy. At the same time, it was a place where he could be completely contained. Certainly for the first few weeks, the information that I've researched confirms that he was very seriously drugged with psychotropic drugs. However, continuing the approved treatment for dealing with somebody that had suffered such a condition in 1947, as the treatment continued, and I think it's safe to assume that the day-to-day clinicians, assistants, psychiatrists, were not part of the secret-keeping apparatus necessarily. Maybe they were following their orders, but Forrestal began to get better. He began to gain weight. He began to show more interest in living and his appearance. Up until then, it took him quite a while to come out of it. But once his attitude changed, it changed. And all the more poignant in that my research confirmed by a number of in-print and really difficult to question sources say that he attempted to take his own life at least 2 or 3 times that I've been able to document in just those awful couple of days between the breakdown and being taken to Bethesda. And most dramatically, trying to throw himself from the moving car that was driving him to Bethesda. He was... Wait,
can I ask you a question first? Because the story that we've been following has it that what he was blabbing about is he wanted to make public the defeat of the of Byrd's Armada and the existence of the base at Neuschwabenland in Antarctica, and that was the very issue that they told him and Byrd to shut up about, and that supposedly he was murdered for talking about. And I just wonder if you had any on that train.
Yeah, I have no way of confirming that. For me, it's one more piece of the puzzle that may or may not fit. There are certain things that look like they make so much sense in context that folks will say, okay, I put that in there too, I accept that. When it may be associated myth, legend, conjecture, rumor, I don't know. Again, I went about it in a real nuts and bolts manner, and my bibliography on the papers I've done has run several dozen in-print sources. Again, it's the most conservative analysis, but there's no question for me that he knew he had to die. In 1949, and this is kind of important, in that now, who among us, and I would venture literally everybody that's listening to this show, has either been in therapy, is in therapy, knows somebody who has been in therapy, or doesn't think that therapy, all of the things that covers, is like the biggest deal in the world. In 1949 America, I'd be surprised if one person in 100, one person in several hundred, knew of a person who was seeing a psychiatrist. It just was not the way it was then. Wealthy people might go to Europe for Freudian analysis or, see somebody in a city, but it was much less than it is now, so much so that one can imagine or try to imagine the attitude of key people, key players, that handful of hardcore Truman intimates who knew to some degree what was going on here, and who now knew, much to their shock, sadness, embarrassment, who knows, the whole white macho ethic in terms of the leadership of America in post-war years it's glaring, it's emblematic. These guys ran the world. They didn't have any competition except this intelligence that they were concerned with, that they were trying to learn about that summer. But Forrestal, he was a womanizer. Women were crazy about him, a very unhappy, very neurotic marriage. He has been described to me by the one person I knew who knew him, and many assorted reading sources, including people who knew him quite well as anybody, that he was absolutely charismatic. He looked a lot like, in some photos, like a really well-groomed Robert De Niro at 50. Very athletic, a great dresser, deadly serious. At Princeton, where he's a passionate amateur boxer, he had his nose broken. And this is in like 1913, and he decided not to have it fixed because he thought it made him look tough, and it did. He was a competitive tennis player. He was a professional level golf player. He was, the Cary Grant figure. He was the guy that the women wanted to sleep with and the guys wanted to have a drink with and hang out. But his inner life was crumbling around him. And he
made him go. What made him lose it? What was crumbling that was so stressful that made him lose it?
As I said, that again, you put the various evidences I have together, and what I should probably do is in the next day or so send you a copy of one of my papers on this that you're welcome to post on your website and share with your listeners, because it will give the actual sources of the information that I'm talking about, ones that are verifiable, nothing that I got like off of the internet or something like that. And it represents years of on and off research. Basically, though, he was as knowledgeable of the UFO situation as President Truman was. And you can verify that literally by reading the responsibilities of the Secretary of Defense as laid out, with him being the first one. I think he knew when he had this breakdown, when he couldn't keep it in himself anymore. And the description that I give is sad, it's profound, it's humiliating for him, and it's very unnerving. When he came undone, he came completely undone in a few short hours. But as he gathered his wits again, and as he's institutionalized and coming out of this, as he's institutionalized, he knows that he has to die, because I think in his heart, in his knowledge of the way that the men around him thought, if a guy like Forrestal, the toughest guy on the block, the most knowledgeable, the one who knew the most secrets relative to this thing, could have a nervous breakdown, that's for girls. I mean, if he had that and he quote-unquote recovered, who's to say he wouldn't have another nervous breakdown and this time blurt out all that stuff that, we're talking about and thinking about? However, and again, it's so poignantly documented, it really reads toward the end like a Greek tragedy. This was a decent guy caught up in one of the most high-pressure moments in the history of the modern world, and dead center at it, that he wanted to live again. It was understood as the hospital authorities saw the progress that he was going to be discharged on Sunday, May 22nd. And his brother, I think his name is Robert, was going to then take him to a mutual friend's estate where he would recover privately. He did not live that long. If you believe the official accounts, he, quote-unquote, committed suicide by throwing himself out of the 16th floor window of the little efficiency kitchen directly opposite the room that he was supposed to be locked in, but oh well, that attendant who had never been on before forgot to lock the thing, and within minutes a thud was heard, and it was his body hitting the portico that protected, the driveway from rain, that kind of thing, of the Bethesda building. The research that followed for me was extremely exciting because sources as blatant, upfront, totally establishment, and at the time, and I still feel in many respects, unquestionable, like the New York Times lead investigative writer. He stated things and confirmed things that I at first thought were just outrageous rumors, like the fact that on the windowsill, outside that window, there were clear indications, whether it was scratch marks or whatever, that Mr. Forrestal was trying to get back in.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. This is not questionable. And there's a myriad of that kind of, good murder investigation, physical evidence around the scene and around the circumstances. The Navy immediately launched an investigation. Yeah.
So he got outside, and he could walk there or stand there, or
not
was
until
he dangling by his fingertips?
The official story, as you'll read, is that at about 1:30 in the morning, the attendant who was checking in on him looked in his room and saw that he was at his desk. And Forrestal was an intellectual. The mark of it is that what he was doing at that moment was copying a Sophocles poem from an anthology, a poetry anthology that he had edited by Mark Van Doren, who I believe was the Poet Laureate of America at the time. And he was copying out this poem, and we know that he stopped in the middle of a word. He didn't stop at the end of a sentence. He stopped in his handwriting, working on hospital stationery, in the middle of a word. I've confirmed that in several sources. But what does that mean when you're doing this kind of investigation? For me, again, I only have my logical mind, my experience as a human being, some ideas about human behavior, and what would account for that? Well, to be blunt, perhaps he had to use the bathroom very quickly. Okay, getting on in age. Or that he was interrupted. And 5 minutes, 7 minutes later, when the attendant came back the other way to check the room, Forrestal was no longer there. This man realized he had forgotten, quote unquote, allegedly, to lock that door. If we believe the story, Forrestal, who had been really looking forward to being discharged, who hospital records, not me, indicate from a number of sources, was growing stronger, more life affirmative, taking more care in his appearance, had gained 12 pounds, was looking forward to release, that he had, in the course of 90 seconds or so, a profound relapse. And at that moment of suicidal depression, after building up a very positive attitude over the days and several weeks before that, that he then realized that his door was open, that he then walked out of his room with nobody seeing him, walked into the efficiency kitchen across the hallway, that he then, where his room was secured, you couldn't go out the window. I don't know whether there were bars or, the kind of glass that you couldn't open or get through beyond a certain point. But the efficiency kitchen had a regular old-fashioned wood frame window with an old-fashioned screen window, the kind that I remember as a kid, a wood frame with screening stapled to it. And allegedly kicked out the screening, then, being in his bathrobe, took off the sash of the bathrobe, couldn't decide whether he wanted to hang himself or go out the window or hang himself out the window, so tied a knot around his neck with the bathrobe sash, then allegedly tied the other end to the radiator directly below the window, then lowered himself out the window to hang himself out the window, and then changed his mind and tried to get back in, and the knot gave out and he died. I'm sorry. I worked crisis intervention in New York on the busiest suicide hotline in New York as a volunteer for 8 years. I networked with, I spoke with many suicidal people, as well as depressed, lonely, and occasionally mentally ill, or even rarer, much rarer, people who actually would fake crisis for attention. But I had an opportunity to network with many mental health professionals, and I had been working on developing the Forrestal material even back then. So it was just a question that I'd reserve if I knew I was having a talk with a psychologist or a psychiatric social worker or a psychiatrist, that in their experience of people who commit suicide, were they aware of any cases where somebody had tried to hang themselves out of an open window on a high floor of a building as opposed to just hang themselves? And none of them, to a person, had ever heard of anything like that before. Now, all of this and more, and it's one of the best pieces of research I ever did, all of this and more, the best of it is still anecdotal, as they'd call it in legal circles. I don't have the smoking gun, but it is such a preponderance of evidence. And when you overlay it on official declassified documentation and observations, human observations about James Forrestal from both people who despised him and people who admired him, that I was able to find in out-of-print post-war memoirs by well-known people whose lives intersected with his. I think we have a definite case for murder, and I am convinced that the events leading up to his disintegration had to do with the weight of the keeping the UFOs secret from his unique vantage point, and some character flaws that did not allow him to find a way out from this terrible trap that ultimately cost him his life.
Who would order that? If that were the case, who would be the person that would that be Alan Dulles? Who would do that?
Well, first, we're talking about two different groups. The group or the individual that might sanction this kind of behavior, and then whomever actually did it, the equivalent of, the mob boss and the hitman. Whether or not Harry Truman himself were gravely concerned about this question, we don't know, and we will probably never know. I find Truman a fascinating character in 20th century history, so much so that I read his memoirs and his letters, and he was a tough everyman who was thrust into this very lonely, powerful position. And was he that worried that he would authorize the murder of somebody he respected and admired, even if he was concerned? Maybe. The old mafia aphorism, before they give you two in the back of the head with the silence 22, it's nothing personal, it's just business. And I say that only half jokingly. If it may have been several key players around Truman who felt that Forrestal had marked himself as such a liability, or potential liability, that, again, nothing personal, they couldn't take the chance. And if he wouldn't take his own life, then he had to be assisted in the process. Now, there's such a thing called plausible deniability, and it's not uncommon for somebody in Truman's situation to be protected, that technically he didn't know. Again, I'm being very speculative here, but I found something in this realm. I've got it down to, for me in my little mind, there's something called MJ12, which has generated hundreds of pages of alleged declassified and classified documentation. A good portion of which may not be authentic. I don't know. I am convinced, however, like a number of colleagues I respect and admire, that the initial so-called 8-page Eisenhower briefing document from 1952, along with a single-page letter from September of 1947, directly from Harry Truman to James Forrestal, worded slightly ambiguously, but, one of those above top secret kind of communications of you are authorized to get on the case with your assignment without being specific here. The 12 men who constituted MJ-12, and I think it was real, and I think they certainly would have been the best choices or among the best choices that the president could have made. Among those 12 men, and I spent time on my own starting in 87 when the whole story exploded, purely for my own intellectual curiosity and edification, to make it my business to figure if these guys really would have known each other, if their lives in official Washington circles would have brought them together. Were they the best qualified people in their area? And I kind of bring it down to 3 people in that group. One might have been the first head of the CIA, a man named Sidney Sowers. Sowers was Harry Truman's chief advisor, national security advisor. He's also an admiral. They had breakfast at the White House almost every day together for years, just the two of them, with over breakfast, Sowers going over the whatever news might be relevant and new information at the time. It was Sowers that Truman sent as his personal emissary to visit Forrestal when he was being contained in Bethesda, and in response to what for a lot of people would sound like paranoid ravings, but I've documented what he said, and he was concerned that there was a dictaphone in the wall of his room, a kind of arcane way of saying that he thought, his room was monitored. And it was Sowers who came and assured him that it was not. Whether or not it was is immaterial. There was also another one of my favorite historical figures of the 20th century that most Americans have no idea who it is, and that's a man named Vannevar Bush. Bush is truly one of the most remarkable men of the century. And I in the late 40s, if you were to go to an old copy of Who's Who, and you opened it up to Vannevar Bush, you would see in small print something like 2.5 pages worth of credits, accomplishments, jobs, etc., while at the same time that he was chairman of the board of AT&T, he was the dean of MIT. This is Vannevar Bush. He was remarkably knowledgeable. He was both Truman and Roosevelt's chief advisor on science and technology. He was the man who, on the morning, on the day Roosevelt died, April 12th, 1945, he was the man who briefed the new president on a little something called the Manhattan Project, which Truman had no idea of. Yeah. And the other individual, let's see, I don't have my notes in front of me, but another cabinet-level individual who certainly might have led this action or authorized it or acted it as an emissary or been involved to some degree. My money is probably on Sowers. He really was the person that Truman trusted the most in so many ways, at least during this period of time, and was most deeply involved in questions regarding intelligence and classified matters. As for the actual murder, and I am convinced that what it was, whether or not Mr. Forrestal was beckoned out of his room, whether he was quickly spirited out of his room and, forced to stop writing, copying out that Sophocles poem mid-word. The word was nightingale, by the way. He wrote night and never finished that word. I also have some powerful but very anecdotal evidence to support groups of his palm prints on both sides, both window jambs, to suggest that he was trying to resist being put out the window. The Navy almost immediately launched an investigation, which went absolutely nowhere for months. And when it was finally released in redacted form, it reads, as you'll read, much more like lawyers saying, we didn't know, our client isn't aware. If you think, they were just covering their own asses, basically. My mom, who had very fond, respectful, and even affectionate memories of James Forrestal when she was a high school student, dating guys in the military, told me years ago when I first brought up this research project, Forrestal's death, my desire to get involved in this, deeper in this work. And I laid out the three people I had been considering. She said, do Forrestal. And when I asked her why, among other things, she said, you have no idea how important he was to us every day, how he was one of the main people who was helping us win the war. Without him, I don't know what would have happened with the Navy. And when we learned on that Sunday morning, everybody in America got up to find out that they already knew, although the news had been delayed, that he had been institutionalized for breakdown. But even, I think, his political enemies were sort of hoping that he'd recover. And she said when we learned that morning that he had killed himself, the country went into a state of mourning. We were beside ourselves. And then in the most incredibly short period of time, he was forgotten and it was done with. And I'll just close that thought by saying James Forrestal's funeral was held at the Arlington National Cemetery. I believe there were 5,000 people in attendance. The president read the eulogy. There was a 21 howitzer salute. And then he was promptly forgotten, unless you went to Princeton and are aware of the Forrestal Princeton Study Center, named after him, even though he technically didn't graduate, or you have a Navy affiliation and are aware of the old carrier, the USS Forrestal. But for the most part, he's just a non-person. And in this more and more 1984 short attention span theater world, where it's considered kind of nerdy to be knowledgeable about something like that, we're in sad times in a way. At the same time, I am always heartened when I do a show like this and you give me an opportunity to run off on a research project involving some really important implications and a very important guy that people should want to know more about. That I get, calls and contacts and messages and emails letting me know that folks appreciate it. There are a number of books about Forrestal out there, but the best, probably definitive biography is one called Driven Patriot. And it's by a man with a wonderfully old-fashioned waspy name of Townsend Hoops. I knew Townsend a little bit. He was a board member of the repertory theater that I helped to manage in New York years ago, and a lovely gentleman who had been like an associate undersecretary of the Air Force, had taught either at Georgetown or the Air Force Academy, and was very interested in UFOs. I found out too late. Cancer took him away before we had a chance to discuss that, even though we had a cordial acquaintanceship from our theater contacts. But Driven Patriot by Townsend Hoops. It's a very powerful biography. Of course, it doesn't talk about what I'm talking about, but it will, if you want to know more about this extraordinary man and this decent patriotic American who was an early casualty of the UFO cover-up. In so many words, it's a book to add to your library. Hardly
You know,
Yeah.
it's really obvious that every American president has had blood on his hands, either directly or he's people that knew what was in his interest did the murder for him. And a lot of people did like Hillary did, or maybe Eleanor did, which is you could tell the first lady stuff, and she would just rap with the president about whatever, and there's plausible deniability. But you know what's underneath all this is that our leaders lie to us, and they are murderers.
Yeah, but I'm still drawing back to Tompkins, who was just so adamant that I pay attention to him when he was telling me about Forrestal. So I think he's saying just what you're saying. You don't know how important this man is and what he knew, and so maybe somehow you could talk to Tompkins' widow, because he worked with him on a regular basis, and I know that she, you know, when you're married to somebody for that long, you know all the stories. There are no secrets, and she might be able to give you some insight if you continue this research, because I think this is a very important, critical issue, and I'm glad you're doing the research. Go ahead, Sasha.
Oh, and about the question about whether Harry Truman would have a colleague killed for national security. Here we're talking about the guy who dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki. Killing's okay with a dude like that. He's from the Pendergast mafia machine.
Yeah, you're right, but he was, even under Pendergast, he was the novelty member of the team because Pendergast knew that he couldn't be bought. And when he learned that Truman wasn't going to back down, Pendergast, who we're talking about here, who is a very savvy, very tough Midwestern, you know, the equivalent of a political mobster, low level, but you know, you're a controller. And he realized he had this candidate that could win that might not listen to him. He was smart enough to realize it might make him look good, and everybody was aware of it. It's just one of those funny quirks. Thought that's coming to me right now is, you know, your programs, the subjects that unite us, the whole movement that most of your broadcasts are around have nothing. They're like a million miles away from, you know, dry post-war history and dead white guys who, you know, were in power more than half a century ago. But these subjects link up. And I just wish more people would give themselves a chance to learn how incredibly interesting and satisfying it can be to augment or branch off from, you know, working on yourself and whatever disciplines you're following, whatever traditions, whatever path, and take time out to see where it dovetails with the real nuts and bolts turnings of post-war history, the men and women who were living, breathing people, and I maybe in the process be a better communicator overall to the people in your world who you want to affect, who you want to come to the light more, and be freer thinkers, be more courageous thinkers.
Right on. Well, we're running out of time. We have, about 3 or 4 minutes. Tell us what you want our listeners to know before we run out of time.
What's the takeaway?
Well, the takeaway is that, as Sonny and Cher used to sing, the beat goes on. This doesn't stop. And the fact is, I have very little patience in my professional life or otherwise for prima donnas. We are all in this together, from the best known to the least known. it's one more reason that it's exciting to be alive. We are in a time of great change. We all can contribute to it in our own way, and assist this world, not even right at this moment, I'm sorry to say, to get better, but at least to put a partial stop to some of the extra damage and accelerated ignorance that we're experiencing in part at this reactionary moment in history where a lot of people are very frightened. They're very dogmatic, and maybe most disturbing, are getting more and more tribal. My way or the highway, compromises for sissies. I have no interest in what you're saying because I know, again, don't bother me with the facts. My mind's already made up. You're a this and reduce somebody to a cultural stereotype. But no, do the work, enjoy yourself, and fight the good fight.
And that's the big then. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
It was great having you. So we'll have you back again. Blessings and
Aloha.
Love everybody.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message. Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting the danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
Take a look around, kid. What do you see? Homes being foreclosed. People working 2-3 jobs just to put food on the table and still drowning in debt. Don't get me wrong. It's country was founded on great ideals and principles.
Progressive presents Get Pumped. Inspiration to help you do insurance stuff.
Okay, time out. You're gonna let your budget be the boss of you? Take control with Progressive's Name Your Price tool. Tell us what you want to pay for car insurance, and we'll help you find options that fit your budget. Here's some music to get you pumped. Da-dong, 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 dang, dang. I hear your budget laughing at you. Oh, wait, that's just those kids laughing at me. Ignore them! Da-dong, da-dong,
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.